that hasn't been with us the past couple weeks?
Well, I mean, here in a minute.
Okay. Well, welcome. Do we need to give them any warnings? Any advice for our newbies? No? I talk fast sometimes. I get excited. Sometimes I cry sometimes. Okay? But usually not all at the same time. So that's good. But welcome. So good to have you. Man, I don't know if you've been able to eat, but I've been blessed just by the food. It's hard cooking for a lot of people. I mean, I cook for more than one, and it's never good. So I know it's hard, but man, they've done a great job, and so I hope you should have shown them appreciation. And I know our worship team are letting so I know we've let the youth be a part of that, and that's great because they need to practice. Because one day they're going to be leading in front of everybody, and so encourage them too, because it's hard enough for them to get up on stage, but to get in front of people that and they're younger than them, and so just kind of encourage them too, because I know it's not maybe the quality, it's not Mike, but they are doing a great thing to get ready for the future of leading us as we pass on the baton. So, all right, so we're gonna let's do a prayer. Anybody have somebody that we're going to be praying for that needs Christ? Remember, that's kind of our focus over the last couple of weeks, the next couple of weeks. Anybody have somebody, you don't have to say their name, just kind of raise your hands. There's God's put somebody on your heart that we can pray for that needs Christ. Awesome. All right, so let's do that, and then we'll get started. Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you so much for who you are, Lord, for your grace, for your mercy, for your kindness. Lord, we thank you that you have saved us when we were undeserving. You have sent Jesus into this world with a perfect, sinless life, died on the cross. The punishment that we deserved, he took on himself, died, buried, and rose again on the third day. God, I pray that you would encourage us to share our faith with those that we come into contact with. Lord, give us the words to say and the willingness to say them. And Lord, I pray that even today as we look at creation and evolution, that we would be open to have discussions that maybe even beyond our expertise or outside of our comfort zone, to challenge people to question the things that they have been taught or thought were maybe true, and instead to look at your word and be open to what you have said. And Lord, we thank you for your word as we look at it now. In your holy name I pray. Amen. Amen. So, tonight we're going to look at creation and evolution, and I hope that it's an encouragement to you. I was a science teacher in public school for a total of 6 years. I love science, but I don't want this to be a science class, okay? But that's kind of where I end up sometimes, just because I love it personally. So it doesn't mean I know everything about science, but I know sometimes how to ask the right questions. And so I hope that this, if nothing else, challenges you to know just because scientists say something doesn't mean it's true. I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this, but the more and more they're talking about 98% of scientists agree on something. 97% of scientists agree on something. Science isn't done by polls. And so anytime there is some kind of poll about science, pretty much I would encourage complete skepticism. In fact, science is supposed to be complete skepticism. You're supposed to question norms. You're supposed to question what you think is real. You're supposed to question the common thought. And nowadays, you're taught if you question the common thought, then you're an idiot. So that's from global warming to evolution to all sorts of things when they're scientifically based. If you question it, you're considered kind of an idiot, for lack of a better word. But true science says, let's question it, let's test it, let's see if it fits, let's see if it's real. So I love science, and it's from the time I was little. I just always loved science. So let's look at a few scriptures here. Colossians 1, 16 through 17. It says, For by him all things were created, things in heaven and things in earth, whether visible or invisible, whether they are thrones or powers, rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Talking about him there is Christ. 1 Corinthians 15:22. For as in Adam we all die, so in Christ we all live. Why I have that verse there is to point out that when we get away from the teachings in Genesis, we really mess up the teachings of Christ. If sin didn't enter the world through one man, and that man Adam, then how does salvation enter the world through the one man Christ? 100% man, 100% God. From here this Sunday, that's what I'm going to be preaching on, so we'll go more detail of how Jesus is 100% man, 100% God. I'm doing all three services, so you will not be able to escape me if you're here this Sunday. So Genesis is extremely important. It is the foundation for the rest of the Scripture. Jesus refers to Adam and Eve. Jesus refers to the creation. And when you believe what Jesus believed, you're in good company. So I would encourage you, if you're someone who currently, and I want to be honest, there are probably people in this room that are evolutionary thinking and think that that's what is the truth. I would encourage you to at least question that. I would encourage you to question that. And I hope to give you some reasons to question that tonight. Now, I personally, just to kind of let you know, I personally am what they call a young earth, a literal reading of Genesis 1 through 3, that there was a literal days that he created. For me, my struggle is, why did he take so long? God did not need time at all. So if we're a biblical people, then we need to try to stick to what the Bible says, right? And so what does it say? Read it for what it is. And some people say, well, could they have been ages? Well, let's just look at that for just... Anybody heard that some people believe that it's not just... It wasn't one day, it wasn't just one 24-hour period, but they were extended, millions of years or something like that. First of all, millions of years does nothing. It's got to be billions. But if that you want to say it was billions of years, look at what happens on the days. Okay, I should have wrote them down, but remember he creates the light and the darkness, and then he creates. I'm trying to remember what's out there. The land. He separates the land, and as you see it, there is a gap between when he creates the plants and when he creates the sun. Is I believe the next day. Now, if it's 24 hours, plants can live in 24 hours without the sun just fine. But if it's billions of years and they don't have the sun for billions of years, plants don't survive. So if you take it figuratively, and the word yom, which is translated day, it can be figurative, it can be. Just like you and I say, wait a minute, we don't mean wait 60 seconds. We mean, not right now, give me some time. So the word yom at times, just like we may say the other day, and we don't mean a particular day, we just mean sometime in the past. The word yom can be used that way. However, when the word yom is used with a number, it's never figurative, with the exception of a 3-day journey. In the Bible, they'll say, I'm going to take a 3-day journey, and that meant that they were going overnight at least. That they had to pack, is what that meant. They weren't just going the same day and returning the same day. So they would say a 3-day journey, and it meant, because traveling that day, they didn't have Google Maps, it could be very different. When you don't have roads, you don't have maps, and you don't know really where you're going, your travel could be hindered for many reasons. So, but that's the exception. The other thing is, when it says in the morning and the evening were the third day. So even in the context, it is showing that it's a 24-hour period that it's discussing. So I am a young earth. With that being said, I don't argue a whole lot about how old the earth is, because the Bible does not say, 4,000 years ago God created the heavens and earth. So I stopped short of trying to nail down how long it's been. I don't know if it's been 20, I don't know if it's been 100,000. I have no idea. All I know is that what the Scripture says, and it says that he did it in 6 days. So I am young earth. Now, sometimes for the sake of discussing with someone who believes in evolution, I'm going to tell you a story that I hope you'll find interesting in a second. But I will not argue about how old the earth is a whole lot, because there's a whole lot of other problems with evolution other than the age of the earth. That's one of them. And I will talk a little bit about why I think the earth is young. So how did this first section we're going to look at, I was Heather and I were engaged, my wife now, but we were engaged, and I was living in Fort Worth. No, she was living in Fort Worth. I was living in North Carolina, and I had flown out to see her right prior to our marriage. And on the way back, we were talking to the airport. This is before 9/11, so she could walk me all the way to the gate. And so we're talking, and as I'm getting ready to get on the plane, we were praying together, and we pray that God would give me an opportunity to share Christ with someone on the plane. Now, I don't know about you. How many of y'all flown? Anybody flown? The good thing about flying is you're not driving and it's quicker. But the other good thing is the person next to you is strapped in. And they have an assigned seat. And they can't get very far away from you. So even if this person doesn't want to hear about Jesus, they're going to hear about Jesus. If I can get the words in, and then they're going to hear about Jesus. So, but usually when I get on an airplane, the person either pulls out a pillow and blanket, falls asleep in about 30 seconds, which I cannot do, or they get out a book and start reading. So I'm walking down the aisle, and I'm one of the last ones to get on the plane. And as I'm walking down, when people see me on the airplane, they get nervous. Especially if they got an open seat, they're going to go, oh man, that guy's going to spill over to my seat. And so I'm walking down, and I'm in the middle seat on this side. There's 3 seats on this side, 2 on this side. And I'm walking, and I'm in the middle between these 2 guys right here. And so I'm so sorry, that's me. You won the lottery. And so I sit down next to them. And as I sit down, I say, hi, I start making, one guy has already got a pillow, so I'm like, all right, he's out. So this guy beside me, and I'm like, okay, I'll have a conversation with this guy. And as the plane takes off, and you now can start going through your baggage, so we've been on their plane for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so, and we know how to put on our seatbelt, how they always help you with that. And so as we're kind of taking off, and we're now able to get, he reaches in his bag and pulls out a book. So I'm not going to get taught this guy. But I noticed the book, and it's Einstein's theory of relativity. Now I'm thinking, who reads that? And I said, that's a pretty interesting book. I said, can I ask you why you're reading that? And he said, yes. Remember, ask permission before you try to get a conversation with someone. So, do you mind if I ask why you're reading? He said, well, I'm a professor. And I said, well, what do you do? What do you teach? He said, well, I teach molecular biology. And he said, I have 2 PhDs, one in interplanetary motion, which has something to do with plants and movement. Those planets, not plants, planets and movement in molecular biology. He dealt with both the really big things and the really little things. So we're talking about a really, really smart guy. And he said, I'm coming back from a lecture where I was talking about why there is no God and we're all a product of the brain machines. I was like, okay. So he said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a seminary student, and I go around talking to people about how there is a God, and we're not the product of blind random chance. So he closes his book, and he says, we're going to have a conversation. And I said, I have a lot of questions for you. Can I ask you some questions? He said, absolutely. So this is what I'm about to tell you in about the next 20 minutes is about a 2.5-hour flight. And so where several people were engaged, not just me and him, but people around us were listening and part of that conversation. Some annoyed, some blessed, all different kinds. So I'm going to have to go fast, but understand it was a long conversation with lots of different details. But so first I said, I have some questions for you. First of all, does the size of our sun have anything to do with life as we know it on this planet? He said, yes. It's pretty interesting he asked that question. The size of our sun is instrumental in life as we know it to exist on this planet. Because if the size was much bigger or much smaller, we could not exist. It is perfect to sustain life on this planet. This is why we don't have life on any other planet. And so we talked about that. We talked about Alpha Centauri, which is about if we sunk the universe, the solar system down to the size of a softball. So Pluto comes in as close to us as within a softball. Alpha Centauri would still be 2 football fields away. So that's the next closest sun. And so that just gives you an idea how far. So imagine if this sun was, even the sun we have, if it was that far away, how that would throw off life as we know it to exist.
Excuse me, say again, how are we judging this? What is the shrinkage you said?
Okay, so if we took the solar system and shrunk it down to the size of a softball, okay, Alpha Centauri would still be 2 football fields away. So we're shrinking everything down just to, our solar system's this big. Pluto's spinning around like this. You know, it's not a planet anymore, but I still call it a planet.
It is a planet again.
Is it? Well, good for Pluto. So the size of our sun is instrumental for life as we know it to exist on this planet. The next thing we talked about the tilt of the earth. I said, you know, when I go to a library or some place that has a globe, or if you remember in class, the earth isn't spinning on an axis like this, but it's tilted at 23 degrees. It actually waffles between, I believe, 21 and a half and 25 and a half degrees, but it kind of wobbles around as it's spinning around, okay? And that's in relation to its spin around the sun. So it's spinning as it's spinning, and it's also wobbling. But that's 23 degrees tilt that the earth is in relation to the sun, okay? That is why that in the summer, I wish I had a ball. I don't have a ball, but maybe this will help. So when the sun if this is the sun here and this is the earth, and it's tilted, when the sun is hitting primarily the northern half of the northern hemisphere, that's when we have summer. Now when the earth goes all the way around to the other side of the sun, and the primary rays, the direct rays is hitting the southern hemisphere, they're having summer and we're having winter. So that's why the northern and southern hemispheres are opposites of the spring, summer, and all that. So does that have anything? Yes. And his example was this: without the spring, summer, and fall, and the cycle there, we would not have our plants be able to go on their cycle. And if we don't have plants that have the seeds and then grow into the crops, we don't eat, and we die. So he said, life as we know it to exist, we must have the 23-degree tilt. If it was much more than that, much less than that, if it varied more than 5 degrees, interestingly, it varies exactly within the 5, but if it varied outside that 5-degree tilt, then life as we know it would not exist. Now he did say that perhaps another kind of life would, but not life that we have. The thickness of our atmosphere. I said, does that make any difference how thick our atmosphere is? And he said, yes. He said, in fact, if you go to Mars, if you were on Mercury, that's the one closest to the sun, would you boil to death or freeze to death? Well, it depends. If you're on the side closest to the sun, it's about, I believe, over 400 degrees, and so you would most definitely boil to death. If you're on the other side, it's it's below zero, you would freeze to death because the atmosphere isn't thick enough. You go to another planet, and no matter which side you're on, because it's got a thick atmosphere, you die on either side from freezing to death because not enough of the sun's rays get through. So our atmosphere, the thickness of it, is just about perfect for sun rays to come in, heat us up, but not to get too hot. It reflects a lot. In fact, a lot of rays get... remember back when I was a kid, and some of you were a little bit younger, do you remember them talking about the hole in the ozone layer? Remember that? And how panicked they were about the hole in the ozone layer? Because as the ozone layer gets eaten away, if it continued, in fact it's way better now than it used to be, but as it got eaten away, their concern was that more rays would come through, we'd have higher rates of cancer, and we would get too hot. And so there were concerns, even back, I think it was in the late 70s that started. So the thickness of our atmosphere is just perfect to allow enough in and reflect enough out, to keep enough in so that in winter during the night we don't freeze, and to thick enough to where it doesn't allow too much in. I would argue in Florida it lets way too much in, but he didn't have that point, so I won't make it. The size of our moon, I said, does that have any bearing on the effects of our planet? He said, absolutely. The size of our moon is instrumental for tides. I don't know if you know this, but the moon and the sun are the reason why we have tides. Ladies, if you want to lose weight, you just figure out when the moon is directly above us, and you'll weigh a little bit less, because it pulls on you as well. So hey, try it. It doesn't make a hill of beans difference to me, but I've tried to work that into my equation. So the moon, what does the tides have to do with it? Well, the tides moving in and out take away the stagnancy they would have. The oceans would be stagnant. And you say, well, is that a big deal? Well, yes, because algae, which is needing that movement is provided by the tides to continue to proliferate, that produces about 70% of our oxygen. Isn't that mind-blowing? We were always worried about the trees down in South America. You need to be worried about the algae. The algae is what provides us most of our oxygen. And so it's very, very important. So the moon, being where it is, being just the size it is, is just about perfect for life as we know it to exist on this planet. I just asked him about what about the distance we are from the sun. You see, if you don't know this, we don't go in a circle around the sun. That's the way you did it when you were a kid making the models, but that's not really how it is. It's more like a football. It's an ellipse, okay? Not pointed on the ends, but it's more of an oval instead of a perfect circle. In fact, the Earth varies in speeds as it goes around. It kind of speeds it, like here's the sun, the Earth speeds up, and then it kind of slows down and goes like this, and then it goes kind of far, and then it kind of comes back like that. It goes fast again, slows down, and kind of ricochets about like that. And he said, that is the distance we are from the sun is just about perfect for life as we know it. If it varied much more, one way or the other, then life as we know it would not exist. I asked about the crust of the Earth's surface, and basically, if you were to take the Earth and shrink it down to the size of an apple, the crust of the Earth would be about the size of the peel of the apple. Okay, so it's in relation to the size of the Earth, the crust is very small. And then if that varied, he said on average, I can't remember if it was 6, I don't have it written down here, but it was 6 or 8 feet. Let's just say 8 feet for the sake of argument. If it varied more than 8 foot in depth, then life as we know it would exist. He said literally the crust takes in oxygen. And if it was 8 feet deeper, it would suck the oxygen. I just spit. See why it's dangerous to be up here? It would suck the oxygen out of the air. Just letting you know, made a good decision to sit back there. So, if it was shallower, we would have too much oxygen and not enough carbon dioxide. So the crust, the thickness of the crust is just about perfect for life to exist. I asked him about the depths of the sea. At some places it's several miles. I think up to 5 miles off the top of my head is the deepest part of the ocean. And he said if it varied likewise, at 6 to 8 feet, then life as we know it couldn't exist. The depths of the ocean, where it goes all the way down to miles, it would create a problem, much seemingly above with the oxidization. So then I asked him about, I remember when I was a kid and we learned in science class that when things get cold, they shrink, right? With one exception. Well, there's several, but one main exception that we studied, which was water. When water freezes, it expands. Now, why does it do it differently? And I asked him about that, and he said, well, basically there's weak hydrogen bonds. If you remember back to, I think it was 6th grade science, when you learned about how many electrons are needed in the outer shell. Each shell needs a different amount of electrons, and because of hydrogen only having 1 electron, but it wants 2 electrons, but it can only support 1 because it only has 1 proton. So it kind of has this fight with itself. It's like a married couple where it wants to have 2 electrons, but it can only really support 1. And so it bonds when water, H2O, when that's bonding, it's a weak bond because of hydrogen. Hydrogen creates weak bonds. And because of that, when water, when the water is together, it's able to have those electrons that it needs, but the top layer doesn't have what it needs. And that's why when you spill water on like a flat table, you can kind of see that it mounds up, or if you fill a glass up ridiculously, it'll actually go over and you'll see it kind of bubble up. You know what I'm talking about? That has to do with weak hydrogen bonds. That's the same reason why water freezes on the top before it freezes on the bottom. Other substances that don't have water, if they were liquid and we were to try to freeze them, they would not freeze from the top down, they'd freeze from the bottom up. Well, what difference does that make? Well, if we had water freezing from the bottom up, our lakes would not have fish. They would all die. Well, not in Florida, we'd still have fish, but not up north, right? They would all die, and so that life would not be able to sustain. There's so many in our ecology, there's so many animals that rely on the fish that are in the oceans, and so the top-down approach allows those animals to to survive, those fish and other animals that are in the lakes all across the north. And so that is necessary for our ecosystem to continue. So then we talked about how the mixture of our atmosphere, 70% nitrogen, I think it's around 20%, if I remember correctly, oxygen, around 8% carbon dioxide, and the rest would be other argon and things such as that. And he said that life as we know it needs these things. Now we don't think of ourselves, like when you breathe, you're breathing nitrogen. You don't really think about that. You think I just breathe oxygen. No, you breathe whatever's in the air around you. You want the oxygen, but you're getting other things as well. But plants have to have that nitrogen. And so the nitrogen is important. So the mixture we have is just about perfect to sustain life as we have it. The Earth spins at about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. You don't realize you're going that fast, huh? Because you're on it, you don't feel it, but about 1,000 miles per hour. So I asked him, well, what difference does that make? He said, well, imagine if we spun 10 times that fast. So our days would be 10 times longer. The plant cycle would not be able to survive that. They would literally not be able to get what they need during the day. And what if it was 10 times slower? Can you imagine Florida if our days were 10 times longer? Oh my, I would not live here. I'm just telling you. I have enough insulation as it is. So these are just things, and like I said, this is a very, very long conversation. So I'm just asking him these questions, just things that what I want to percolate in his brain is I want him to think of the big picture right now. I want him to see that things seem to be tuned a certain way, to function a certain way. And I said, so how do you have so much faith? So what do you mean? He said, I don't have faith. I said, you have tremendous faith. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I don't have enough faith to be an evolutionist. So I said, let me ask you this. I said, if I had 10 coins, and I labeled those 10 coins with a Sharpie marker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I put all 10 coins in my pocket, and I were to shake those coins around in my pocket, and I was to pull the first coin out with the number 1, and I pull that coin out first, what is the likelihood of that? He said, see, that's 1 in 10. I said, if I return that coin in my pocket, and I shake it around, and I pull the second coin out second, what's the likelihood of that? He said, 1 in 10. I said, no, it's 1 in 100. To get the first coin out first and the second coin out second, that's 1 in 100. Your odds increase tenfold. So if you return the coin to your pocket, shake it around, and pull the third coin out third. So you got the first one first, the second one second, the third one third. What's the likelihood? That's 1 in 1,000. I said get the fourth coin fourth, 1 in 10,000. Fifth coin fifth, 1 in 100,000. Sixth coin sixth, 1 in a million. 1 in 10 million for 7. 8 would be 1 in 100 million. 9 would be 1 in a billion. And 10 would be 1 in 10 billion. I said, so you mean just the 10 things we discussed, there's a 1 in 10 billion chance for all these things to come together, because if one of them were not in the sequence it needed to be, life as we know it would not exist. Do you see that takes a lot of faith? And with that, the plane landed. I'm not kidding. With that, the plane landed. We did not get to finish our conversation, but we had a good one. We were actually landed in Atlanta. We were meeting in a connecting flight, but we sat on opposite sides of the airplane. And that was kind of before you really did a lot of emailing and stuff like that. But I regret not being able to finish that conversation. But he had things to think about. And he admitted he had things to think about. Did he become a creationist that night? I don't think so. But he at least had some opportunity. And all I really did was ask questions. All I really did was to create the idea in his mind that maybe he doesn't know it all. And so I want to encourage you to think about that as you have opportunities to just talk to somebody, ask questions, create thought, help them to see that they don't quite have the big picture. So what does evolution curtail? What goes into it? Here's things you have to believe in evolution. You have to believe that matter comes from non-matter. That is, that everything we have now, one of the laws of science is matter can be neither created nor destroyed. So if you talk to a evolutionist, at some point in the distant past, the infinitesimally small thing blew up, and that's why we have everything we have. Matter came from non-matter. Motion comes from non-motion. There was a time when there was no motion, now we have motion. Where did that come from? What caused the movement? Order comes from disorder. If you go to your children's or grandchildren's bedroom and you let a bomb, their room's a disaster, and you blow it up, it's not going to get better. But however, after the Big Bang, we now have order, we now have systems, we now have spheres. I mean, how did this happen? Life comes from non-life. So it's always interesting, in a science textbook, almost every biology textbook on one of the early pages talks about spontaneous generation. Something was believed about in the 1600s, that they believed that life came from non-life, that just would happen, that if you literally, that if you had meat sitting out on a table for a prolonged period of time, it turned into maggots. They didn't realize that flies laid eggs, and there was a cycle of the fly larvae and that kind of stuff. So they believed that non-living things became living things. And I think it was Faraday? No, Faraday was One of the, maybe Pascal, but one of the early scientists did an experiment where he showed that no, life only comes through life. By he put meat inside of a jar and put a covering on it, and he showed it never within that jar never turned into maggots. And so he did a demonstration for that. So life doesn't, so it'll say it somewhere in the beginning of the text, but life only comes from life. Then you get about another 3 or 4 chapters and it says sometime in the distant past, life came from non-life. Like, what, did you not read the first chapter? So life comes from non-life. Gender comes from non-gender. Where did gender come in? So if we're evolving, let's just say, for instance, that wall over there is monkey, okay? That wall over there is me, okay, monkey and me. And this represents the time it took to get from monkey to me, all right? And it takes, according to evolutionists, millions and millions and millions of years to get from there to there. What if the male monkey evolved over millions of years differently than the female monkey? What's the chance that when the male monkey got to this point, where it's half whatever and half of whatever else, and the female monkey, what's the chances of them being together at the same time? Does you understand what I'm saying? How did we get from, if that's non-gender, there's asexual reproduction like worms and stuff like that, how did asexual reproduction become sexual reproduction over millions of years? How did one become a female? These are just very simple questions that evolution doesn't even begin to even scratch the surface of.
My question to that was always, why did it stop?
Well, they would say it continues. They would say, well, it's continuing on, but it's taking millions of years, so that's why we can't observe it.
So the humans keep walking out of the jungle to become humans.
Well,
shouldn't that just be continue to happen? We just keep walking out naked.
Well, the real question is, if from that to this took natural selection, where that no longer lived, was fully adapted, and so it had to evolve to fully adapt to the changing world, then why does that still exist when this exists at the same time? That should be no longer. The reason why evolution takes place, according to evolutionists, is because the changing environment requires them to make changes to adapt, okay? Well, if that's true, then why does that still survive? It shouldn't survive by the very definition of evolution. So reproduction comes from non-reproduction. How does that happen? At one point, it was cells or amoebas were splitting, but now it's a total different things. How does chaos form order? Other questions: which comes first, DNA or the proteins needed by DNA to produce DNA? So in other words, it's kind of like which came first, the chicken or egg? DNA needs certain proteins to make DNA, which the only way to get those proteins are from DNA. So it's which came first, the DNA or the proteins needed for the DNA. So how does that work? You cannot gradually, this is Michael Behe, who I believe when he wrote his book wasn't even a believer. He's a molecular biologist, I believe from MIT. I wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, which don't read unless you just love science, but it's very scientific. But he says you can't gradually improve a mousetrap by adding one part and then the next, over a period of time. A trap having half its parts doesn't function half as well. In fact, it doesn't function at all. So in other words, if we evolved, having a heart but not having lungs is worthless. The heart has no function. So how did things evolve at the same time? How did that happen? How did it go from, they say that a mouse became a bird. So if the mouse became a bird, where is the half mouse, half bird, and what advantage is it to be a mouse that has wings that don't function yet? If it takes little small increments to get there, what good is a half mouse bird? Whatever that would be. All right, there's some more quotes there. Go down to the blue one there. Is evolution scientific? Now, the scientific method, I think we all learned this when we were kids. You might have learned it a little bit differently. It's said in different ways from different textbooks, but there's the same idea. First of all, you observe something. You come up with a hypothesis, which is a logical guess as to what's occurring. Then what do? You make predictions based on the hypothesis. Okay, so if I'm right about this, this is what would happen. And then you do testing, experiments. You might have learned that as experiments. That's what I learned when I was a kid. Nowadays they say testing. And then once you've done that, you repeat, you repeat, you repeat. You question, you question, you question, until you find that there are no other explanations other than the one and that's how you use the scientific method. So first, let me ask you this. Can you observe evolution? No, by the definition of evolution, it takes millions of years. It cannot be observed. So it can't be observed. Is there a hypothesis? Yes, they have a hypothesis. So they've come up with an idea. So they have an idea, I'll grant them that. Can you make predictions based on evolution? No, you can't make any predictions. Can you test it? There's absolutely no way to test it. In fact, some people have falsely, and I've even heard this from Christians, that, well, we have different breeds of dogs, and people have bred these different dogs, and that's how they've gotten bigger dogs, smaller dogs, dogs with bigger ears, dogs that like to chase hogs, dogs that run from hogs. There's different kinds, but I would argue that proves creation. That proves intelligent design, because there's an intelligent person that is working and orchestrating this thing to come about. So let me also be clear and take a step back. By evolution, what I mean is that all living things came from the same living thing. It doesn't mean, the Bible doesn't teach that God created all dogs uniquely. He doesn't go into great detail. He says after their own kind. And so I would argue that what that is saying is that dogs are all from the same kind. Cats are of a different kind. And so it's not that we're not, so evolution by, the birds, Darwin's finches, they're all birds. And there are different kinds of birds that can't breed with one another. I would say that is what evolution is talking about when it's saying all the different animals come from the same thing. We're not talking, some people use the word microevolution and macro. Macro is everything evolved. Micro is that all dogs are related to the same dog. Okay? So the Bible, I think, allows for, and the things such as all dogs coming from the same dog. That's why a lot of people say, if you want to talk about the ark, where did all the animals fit on the ark? Well, it was actually pretty easy because it was based on the kind, not based on every individual species. Very, very different species and kind.
But real evolution means that it came from one,
Yeah.
but everything, monkeys,
Humans came from an embryo, from embryo. They do. People came from a amoeba. That's what they're arguing for, and I would say the Bible denies that and says that that's not the way it is. But I don't think the Bible is saying that all the different kinds of horses are unrelated. I say they are related. Many of them we can prove recently that they're related. But the jump in kind from one kind to another. That's why God says they will produce after their own kind. Doesn't mean there's not variance. There's variance in this room. And some of you are glad you vary from me.
There has been, especially with not doing that, but with the kind, there's lemurs in Africa, but there's also leaders in the Amazon.
Yep.
They're the same creature,
They've
adapted to their environment.
Absolutely. There is adaptation. That is true. And the problem is evolutionists use kind adaptation as an illustration for complete changes within, outside of species beyond kind. That because the famous ones are the finches. Well, the finches have different beaks, and because they have different beaks, well, they're all finches. They're all still finches. They're all still birds. Demonstrate a finch becoming a lizard or vice versa. That's evolution that I'm debating, that I'm against. And so there's a big difference between the two, and I don't want, but that almost any time you sit down with an evolution and say, can you share with me an example of evolution? There's a great YouTube video that I almost just showed it because it's about 30 minutes long, by Ray Comfort. Just do Ray Comfort Evolution, and you can see about a 35-40-minute video on YouTube that's well done, where he goes up to professors and goes, can you give me an example of evolution? And just ask them, can you give me an example of evolution? And everyone they give you is not an example of evolution, but just simple adaptation. The same animal, it's the same animal, just one is darker than the other. That's not evolution. That's a totally different thing than what evolution is. And so,
Wouldn't we be finding some fossils that were dog, cats, or birds?
absolutely, we should have, everybody talks about the missing link. We have billions of missing links we don't have transitional forms there should be transitional forms between all the different kinds of animals, and we don't have it. And we'll talk about a little bit at the end, depending on how much time we have, to some answers to some quote-unquote transitional forms with humans. I want to be able to draw a distinction between the evolution on a small scale, adaptation, I don't like calling it evolution, but adaptation is real, that's happened, that can be demonstrated. But that's completely different than going from one kind of animal to a different kind of animal. All right, there at the very bottom, second law of thermodynamics is we're running out of the usable energy, it's becoming less and less. In other words, the world is breaking down instead of building up. Evolution is saying, no, it's getting better. Well, no, it's getting worse. Watch the news. They make all kinds of assumptions, talking about the kind of age of the earth. First of all, carbon-14 dating only is good for about 2,000 years. Much beyond 2,000 years, carbon-14 dating is inaccurate. So says the guy that invented carbon-14 dating. They make all kinds of assumptions, such as ice ages, so they account for that. I remember when I think I was 9, and I went to Washington, D.C. to the museum, the Natural Science Museum, and I was talking to one of the lady that went around and gave us the tour, and we came up on this one dinosaur bones, and she said this was, I don't remember, 450 million years old. And I was a kid, and I thought, that's amazing. I said, how do you know that? How do you know how old it is? And she said, we know how old it is by the rocks that we find it in. I said, oh, how do you know how old the rocks are? We know how old the rocks are by the bones we find in it, which is a circular argument. And I said, well, if you only know it by the rocks, you only know the rocks by the bones, you only know the bones by the rocks, I don't understand that. And I just wanted to answer. I wasn't even trying to be a wise person at this point. And she goes, you have to be a scientist to understand it. So at the time, I thought that was good. But then I grew up and I realized that's still really stupid. That doesn't explain it. And now that I know scientists, they don't know it either. In fact, to get something dated that they send into a laboratory to get dated, they have to put what they think it is, how old they think it is, or they won't even date it. All kinds of assumptions built into it. Other things that kind of point to a young Earth is they also assume that there's been no flood. The reason why that's important is in a catastrophe like a flood, layers would form very fast. I don't know if you remember when you were a kid, and I did with my science classes, we put like different size rocks and pebbles and sand and dirt in a jar, shook it up, and then waited a day. The next day you can see the different layers that form. Layers form very fast in a catastrophe like a flood, whereas layers don't form very fast in just a desert where there's nothing really like that happening. And so I would say, and in fact, if you want to learn more about this, a guy named Henry Morris, who's probably on YouTube, that was a geologist that talked about when Mount St. Helens blew up, it formed hundreds of stratus layers overnight. Whereas they would always say each stratus layer takes hundreds of years. So overnight, when Mount St. Helens blew up and threw all that smoke and debris in the air, things settled at different rates, and literally lots of layers were formed overnight. Yes?
Just a quick resource to reinforce that is, if y'all haven't seen, is Genesis History. It's a documentary that was out in movie theaters last year, and it's available on Netflix for free, and it gives scientific explanation of what the flood did, and so that you could actually see it if you've never had the opportunity to go to the Creation Museum, where a lot of that is taught. It's just a really,
it is very well done.
Great,
it's a good
what's
show.
What's the name of it?
Is Genesis History, and it's by the guy that did the Truth Project. What's his name? Dale Tack?
Dale.
Yeah, a great, very well done on Netflix. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of one of the things that was in Genesis History is how they explain the foot tracks, because if it's been hundreds of years, wouldn't all foot tracks be gone if it was slowly
Why their dinosaur footprints fossilized?
Yeah, and how wouldn't that disappear if it was millions of years? A flood will totally explain that, because it goes like right over it, and it settles dirt on top of it, creating a cast of it. And so that was something.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't even have this in my notes, but Glenrose, Texas, there is a geologist, and I've seen it with my own eyes when I lived in Texas, but he has a dinosaur footprint, and in the heel of the dinosaur footprint is a man's footprint. And he has two of them. One is, you can see it, from here to that chair, you can tell it's a dinosaur footprint with a man's footprint in it. The other one's a little more eroded. It wasn't formed quick enough. And so you kind of have to look, and I didn't really see it till he pointed it out. But one of them is very clear, man's footprint inside of a dinosaur footprint. But once again, when I'm talking about evolution, I don't even go there because they think you're crazy and they won't even finish the conversation. So when I'm dealing with someone who's an evolutionist, they are so against the truth that they can't even see that. And so I'm just trying to get them to first be skeptical of what they already believe. Show them that their statements are belief statements, not fact statements. And then hopefully start showing them some of the evidence like that would be hopefully over to help them over even more. So other things, talk about the shaping moon. Every year the moon gets further away from the earth. So if we rewind that, at what point was the moon on the surface of the earth? It would lend to us to believe that our solar system is young and not old. As a matter of fact, one of the things that this was most convincing to me, when they built the lunar module to land on the moon, remember it had the real long legs. I might have talked about this earlier on in this a couple weeks ago. But they had those long legs, and the reason why is they figured if the Earth had been here for 1 million years, the moon had been here for 1 million years, there would be 6 feet a layer of dust on the moon's surface. But they got there and there was about 2 or 3, which would suggest thousands of years, not millions of years. But it never talked about it. But that's why it had those big long legs on it. So anyway, just more evidence that maybe the Earth hasn't been around as long as we think it has, or as long as they claim it has. So I'm skipping down to the complexity of life. Here's just some quotes. This is a great book. Philip E. Johnson, Darwin on Trial. Johnson is a law professor at, what's the crazy liberal one out in California? Berkeley. Yeah, y'all, I knew you'd know. Berkeley. He's a law professor at Berkeley. And so his specialty is the law. And he basically wrote this book saying, a lawyer can see that the science is all wrong here. A lawyer can cross-examine the witness of the evolutionists and say, things aren't adding up here. Great book. The simplest organism capable of independent life is a prokaryote bacteria cell. Little bitty thing. In a masterpiece of miniaturized complexity, which makes a spaceship seem rather low-tech. Basically, he goes, and Michael B. he does a better job of this, but it's much more scientific. He talks about these little prokaryotic cells, these little tiny things that in Darwin's day they thought was a blob. They thought it was very simple. As now we have electron microscopes, we're able to get into this thing and see what it is. It's like a city with networks of moving parts. It has this, some of them have this thing called a flagellum, this kind of like tail that spins around that propels it through liquids. And this flagellum is rotating at hundreds of thousands of RPMs, spinning. And it can stop, and I believe, if I remember off the top of my head, at a half a revolution, it can stop and reverse and go in the other direction. We can't build something that can do half that. And here it is in a little microscopic thing. And that can self-reproduce. We can't build anything that self-reproduces, besides our kids. But anyway, so just what they talk about, Darwin's black box is basically what he says is, the deeper we get into something that we think is simple, we open it up, we realize this is more complex than our bodies. Then we open up something inside of that, and it's more complex. And we open up something. So when we think we should be getting simpler and simpler inside the cells, it is more complex, and each piece is necessary for it to exist. You can't have a cell without a cell wall. You can't have a cell wall without a nucleus. You can't have the cell can't reproduce without that nucleus and how it so all these parts are coming together and have to all be there for it to function, or it doesn't work. So that's a great book. Another one, evolution requires immediate forms between species, and planetology does not, that word right there, the big P word, does not provide them. Let's see, are there any other quotes I want to read here? You can go down to Piltdown Man. That's almost about a little more than halfway down. Piltdown Man. These are the half people, half apes. The first one is now considered one of the greatest hopes. It was actually intentionally done. They took a jawbone and they filed it down to make it look like a transitional form. Nebraska man found out to be, it was a jawbone. They had a pig's tooth. And they had a whole family drawn on the pictures when they did the press release and stuff. And all they had was a tooth. And it was found out later on there was an extinct pig. They just didn't realize that there was that sort of a pig, but they found more intact carcasses later, or bones later. Cro-Magnon man and distinguishable from our man looks just like us, but shorter and probably skinnier. Homo, however you say that last one, I'm not real good with my Latin. Stated that evolutionary anthropology, that it is increasingly clear that Homo, that word, has become a wastebasket taxon, little more than a convenient, so, what's that word? I lost my place. Recipient, for a motley assortment of humanoid fossils. In other words, they weren't even of the same fossil. And that's Lucy. I don't have Lucy down here, but Lucy was found, its bones were found miles and miles apart, which is not okay in anthropology to assemble a dinosaur from different parts like that. There's a great book by Hank Hanegraaff called The Face. That goes through all these in great detail on how they're hoaxes. Most of the scientific world even considers these hoaxes nowadays. Okay, does anybody know what Darwin's book was called? I meant to start off with this.
Origin of Species.
No. That's part of the title. What's the whole title? The Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection and the Preservation of the Favored Races. Yeah, now you know why you don't hear the whole title. In Darwin's Origin of the Species, his argument was that we are more advanced than the other races. And it is blatantly racist. In fact, Hitler used it as part of his rationality as to why he could do what he was doing, because they're not fully human. So I think that is a great way to begin to open up the mind of an evolutionist, because you're kind of exposing you're a racist. And I don't know about you, but I sure don't want to be called a racist. So you're kind of exposing your worldview is racism. Your worldview says that some people are more developed than other people. And so it, if nothing else, emotionally wrecks them, emotionally makes them go, what do I do with that? And so I have found that just reading the title and then discussing a bit to be the best argument I've had with evolutionists. Unfortunately, what happens when most Christians talk about this kind of thing is if a bear's running at you and you are fortunate enough to have a gun, a bear's running at you, you shoot the bear once, and the bear continues to run at you, you don't put your gun down and go, oh man, I give up. Just let the bear come and eat you. What do? You shoot again. And you shoot again. So what I'm saying is there's no argument that's just going to go, oh yeah, I need Jesus. But you're shooting different bullets, and you're using different guns at times, and you're taking opportunities to slowly get them to slow down and begin to see what we hope is the Holy Spirit shows the light to their heart. So I don't want you to be overwhelmed if, man, you like a particular one of these thoughts or something, and you sit down with an evolutionist and you tell them, they go, well, I don't care about that, or they just keep right on running at you anyway. Hey, just don't give up. Keep trying. But the one, just if you want to just Google the definition or the title of that Darwin's book, that is unbelievably wide open and eye-opening to those. At the bottom are some books that I recommend that I personally have enjoyed, and then on the other side, cheaper options, websites that are good. I don't know if just because that website's on it doesn't mean I agree with everything on it, but it's a good resource to have. So we have about 10 minutes, and so I just want, if you have questions or thoughts or what about, let's entertain those.
I do. You mentioned dinosaurs before. I often wondered, I'm a creationist, I don't really have a terrible problem with it, but what would be the argument if you're a new Earth person to talk about dinosaurs?
There are two Christian sides, two predominantly Christian sides of the coin on where dinosaurs are. Some hold to what they call the gap theory, which I do not personally hold to, but it doesn't bother me as much as it bothers some non-gapists. The gap theory is that Genesis 1:1, God creates the heavens and earth. And there is in the Hebrew there a pause. It's kind of like a dramatic pause. Yeah, it is in the vernacular or in the language structure. It is a clear pause. Some even young Earth creationists would say God created the heavens and the earth, and then waited some time before He created everything else. The people that are very pro-gap theory believe that God, for some reason, created dinosaurs right there, and then where it talks about him hovering over the void, that they died out at that point, and then the special creation started after that. I don't hold to that, but that is a view of it. My view is that there were dinosaurs at the same time there were people, but they died out after the flood. They were not able to adapt. The climate changed. I would argue the climate changed after the flood. There was no rain before the flood, remember that? And then that was the first time it rained. And so that's when the whole rain cycle started. And lizards especially just had a hard time adjusting to that. They say, well, were there dinosaurs? Well, how could there be dinosaurs and people at the same time? Well, there were lions and people at the same time. There are crocodiles and people at the same time. So I'm not saying it was fun. I'm like, hey, look at a dinosaur, kids. No, you ran from the dinosaur. But I do think they coexisted. In Job, I wish I had written it down. There are Job. I don't know how well you know your Bible history, but Job is the first book written. It's the oldest book. Now Genesis is about what happened first, but Genesis is written by Moses. Job happens before Moses. So the first book written down was Job. Okay, the first things were Genesis. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? The first book written though it's kind of like Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus are the prequels to Job. All right. So, but Job was the first one written, and he talks about the behemoth. And if you read your Bible, just do a Google search for behemoth, and Leviathan, I think is the other one. And if you read the context of what it says, it talks about this animal. It has a tail like a cedar tree. Okay, cedar trees are big. Its strength is in its hips, but it eats grass like an ox. Okay, so what animal is this? Any animal you try to fit it to that's alive today does not fit. They say a hippopotamus. That's what most scholars say, it's a hippopotamus. A tail like a cedar tree? Have you seen a hippopotamus? That's not a cedar tree. It's a crocodile. Well, a crocodile has big tails. Would you say its strength is in its hips? It's grass. Yeah. So every animal, every modern animal you look at, or even an extinct animal, other than dinosaurs, do not fit what it's talking about. And it discusses it not as it's a rare event. It's just this animal. Everybody knows about it. It's kind of the way it's talked about. So I would say, I personally believe that is referring to a dinosaur. Yes?
I'd say the same thing with how they're extinct now was because of climate change after the flood.
Yeah.
But one way I would justify the dinosaur is just another animal is like, it was supposed to be just an animal when it was created, but then after the fall, things changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in the fall of man, when sin entered the world, it clearly not just hurts Adam and Eve, but it affects all of creation. And there's a lot of talk about it. Some of what is subtle and you can miss if you're not really reading it. But it affects the ground, and thorns begin to grow up. Some even argue that bees didn't have stingers before then, and you had Kit Kat and it was a lion that was you could hang out with the lion and y'all were buds, but that all changed. I mean, I don't know, and I try to be careful not to go beyond what the Scripture says, but I can see where they get those kind of ideas. So the dinosaurs that I try to stay away from that when I'm talking outside the Christian circles. I'll be honest with you. It's just I get discredited, and they won't even let me finish the conversation unless I just kind of keep that part of my beliefs a little quieter. Anything else? So,
And you're talking the spectrum, and you have ape over here, and you have man over here, and you're wondering about where's the in-between, which most would just say that was the cavemen and Neanderthals.
yeah.
Could it be, yes, we still have apes, why are they not extinct? Well, apes don't live how we live. They don't live in a house and cook dinner for their kids and stuff like that. They live in forests and jungles and trees and feed off of the wildlife. So could it be that there was a transitional being, a transitional species, something in the middle, but because it didn't have that and it couldn't live in this, it needed both, that's why it's not there, it's extinct, it's no longer there.
Well, the problem is we don't have the transitional forms. And by Darwin's own account, we should have millions. I mean, not just between that and this, but each step of the walk, there should be thousands of them. And we, especially between ape and man. Because dinosaurs were so long ago, according to the evolutionary model, that makes sense why we don't have those transitional forms. But this modern, the modern thing, modern in the evolutionary timeline of chimpanzee to us, there should be millions between them, not one or two obscure things that are stretches at best. So that's and then if they were fine living in the jungle with just eating their bananas, why was evolutionary necessary? Why was there an evolutionary elite? Why did that take the step out of the jungle and then that still stay? Usually within the survival of the fittest is they're most fit to survive in a changing world, in a changing climate. So if it changed where if the climate change necessitated the adaptive change, well then why are they still here too? That's what we're talking about when we say why are they still here. Is if for evolution to be necessary, there has to be a reason for it. So why was there a reason for us to evolve but not for them? And what they should be is they should be a transitional form to it. But say we've never, just for the sake of thinking, say we've never seen an ape, but we've seen chimpanzees. And one day we're walking through the woods and we find an ape. Well, I would argue that an ape is more like a human than a chimpanzee is. Does that prove evolution? No, all that proves is apes. So even when we find I don't even like calling it a transitional, even when we find a different ape, it doesn't therefore prove evolution. It proves the existence of that ape. Another kind. So unless you had every step between there and then, would you really be able to begin to make a case for it? And then, the other things I would ask is if something was happening and there's a chimpanzee dying in the water and there's a human dying in the water and you only have enough time to save one, which one would you save and why? Why is there a difference between us and apes? Or is there? Are we just more time? Is it just time that separates us?
Well, if we had 3 million years from the apes to us, figure 10,000 apes per year, that's 3 billion. Right there, we should be tripping over monkey men.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They should be everywhere.
Leave it to a numbers guy to pull out numbers like that.
That's on the low side.
DNA doesn't change either, does it?
Well, DNA mutates, but it's never a positive thing. And most mutations, gene mutations and things such as that, are negative things. You're not like, if you come in, my child has a DNA mutation, you're not like, oh yay, now they got a third leg that they're running on. It's a medical problem that's occurred. Mutations like that are rarely, if ever, good. But the big thing is those mutations don't account for evolution. They're not changing from kind to kind. They are variants within kind, different colored things or different heights. People in different regions are taller and shorter and different shapes and things such as that.
I just wanted to suggest a book. There's a fairly new book out that's called Replacing Darwin. It's by Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, J-E-A-N-S-O-N. He's a molecular cellular biologist, was not a Christian, but through his studies have come to see that he wrote about how Darwin 150 years ago, there's all these different sciences that have developed since his time, and that he goes back and he explains that that Darwin, at his time, only had, say, 15% of all the pieces that make what we have today. And so it kind of discredits his thoughts in a very scientific way, how he just didn't have all the pieces. He went on his assumptions and probably his prejudice at the time, you know, because he really thought that, you know, his kind, or that, you know, that some just weren't, you know, as smart as him and a survival of the fittest. And it was just really a really good read, because especially because I've got a lot of very sciencey people in my family who absolutely think that I'm absolutely insane, and sometimes I have to go science for science with them, and that was really a great book.
There has been, in fact, it's interesting that the Christian world, many are starting to accept evolution and trying to force it into the Bible and things. Today, there is more scientific evidence for creation away from evolution than when I was a kid. I mean, lots more. I mean, the arguments for it are so much better, so much more scientific. And now I would encourage you to Google intelligent design as opposed to creation. They've moved away from the word creation because in legal circles, we automatically lose because of separation of church and state. So they're calling it, you're talking about intelligent design, not calling it God, and there's legal reasons why they're doing that. But, you know, they're still, most of them are still Christians, some of them are other religions or whatever. But intelligent design is really good stuff and far more advanced than it used to be. Yes, sir?
Just one thing about from monkey to you, there's no fossil record to indicate any of that either.
No, I mean, like they said, we should be tripping over the fossils, but we're not. And that's one of the, I mean, there's many problems, but that's definitely one of them. Interesting enough, and I'll close with this story. I'm reading the book right now by Jonathan Wells, Icons of Evolution. Great book, but he tells a story about how he went to a lecture from a guy from China who was lecturing on questions he had. This is a guy way advanced in science, lecturing on some questions he had of Darwinism. And at the end, they were like crickets, like no one responds or gave him any, you know. And so he was talking to, and this guy's not a Christian. He's just saying, these are questions I have that I can't give any answers to. And this was a bunch of secular scientists. And afterwards, Jonathan was talking to him, and he said, the guy was like, why didn't anybody give me an answer or help me, you know, give me some thoughts on what it could be? He said, because in America, we don't question Darwin. We don't question that. And the Chinese guy laughs and says, in China, we can't speak against our government, but we can question Darwin. In America, you can't question Darwin, but you can speak against your government. I thought that was just profound. And that is how the scientific community is shutting a lot of people up, is just by you're a quack if you don't agree with them. So question them and help them to see that they don't know it all. I don't know it all. But help them to see they don't know it all either, and hopefully you can encourage them to look at the truth of Christ. Let's close. Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for who you are. Lord, I pray that we have done justice to your word and the fact that you are the creator of all things. That we try to reconcile our understanding of the world to your scripture, not your scripture to the world, and that we want to fit our worldview into the scripture and not try to force the scripture to adapt to our worldviews. God, I just pray that this was beneficial and encouraging, and that although not every question can be answered, but Lord, may we know that your word does contain truth, and that we should bow our knee to it and not to the so-called science. In your holy name I pray. Amen. Awesome. Well, I love you guys. Appreciate you so much for coming. It's very awkward to teach when no one's in the room.